Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Salam Media. Today we're going to unpack the first part of the presentation, which was South Africa's case to the ICJ, um, requesting provisions against Israel with regards to the genocide in Gaza. Now, before you get emotionally invested in the possibility of international law holding the Zionist entity accountable, remember that it was made by and for the same people that brought you the Berlin Conference, the Sykes-Picot, and the Balfour Declaration. So the question is, can international law actually offer us any benefit, some benefit, especially when it considers the global south, considering the way in which power has been skewed, the way in which courts and the law has been used and abused in order to perpetuate a particular narrative or the ideals of a particular people. We have much to fear, to resent, to doubt, but also to be hopeful about. And today it is all about hope. Hope that at last things will change, that the shift in the world in terms of the new geopolitics will bring something better, a better world for all of us. Because the way in which the world is going in the current trajectory, it's simply not sustainable. It's just war after war after war. But people of the world want peace. So with me today, we have two very special guests. I have Rehana Parker, who is an advocate and a director of RKP Attorneys Inc. And with me also is Professor Jeff Halper, and he is an activist for very many years, has worked on Israeli demolitions of housing in the West Bank, in Palestine. And Rehana with RKP attorneys also released a statement for women in law supporting South Africa's position at The Hague. So I would like to say thank you very much to both of you for being here with us, with me today. And let's hope that we can bring some value to what happened, hopefully before the press conference happens.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to be part of this platform this afternoon, post a very, very powerful presentation by the South African legal team.
Thank you. And Professor Jeff, can you unmute yourself so that we can hear you?
Sure. Well, thank you also for having me, and it's really great to be with Rehana. And yeah, I mean, I'll talk about this, but I'm looking at kind of a split screen. On the one hand, I'm looking at the proceedings in The Hague. On the other hand, I'm really watching the Israeli commentary.
Yes.
On TV. So that'll be kind of interesting to look into.
It will be interesting for you to unpack that for us. Yes, and I just, Jeff, if you don't mind, I would like to chat with Rehana first, because she has to leave us shortly, and so I just want to get some greater insights from her, and then you'll have the platform to yourself. So, Rehana, as an advocate who's watched this entire proceedings, I mean, please give us your insight, straight away from the get-go. But let's start with the emotion. Because as a woman, as a mother, as a grandmother who's watched this, I was just simply devastated. It's like, it's raw. I cannot deal with it. I am genuinely psychologically affected. And I want to know, did you as a professional feel the same before you bring in, the legal aspects and your professional perspective?
Oh, definitely. I think by the time I got to the Irish lawyer, which was Advocate Blinny, I then started breaking down completely. I was fine at the beginning when Advocate Adila Hassim was presenting, and when Tim Baker came along and he did his presentation. Professor Dugard, I was fine, but the minute she started and she brought in all the social issues and the vulnerability of people, and she talked through each and so many different facets of social justice, that broke me down. And it only took the council load to bring me back to calmness. So I certainly was deeply moved. I think it started this morning at the Western Cape High Court when Lawyers for Justice all got together. It was Lawyers for Palestine, SA Jews for Palestine, Women in Law South Africa, South African Women Lawyers Association, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, as well as a National Association of Democratic Lawyers. So I think it started flaring up then. But of course, the images that have come through to our handsets from the 7th of October was so compelling that one sort of watch the space all the time. Not that I've not watched it before. Of course, we've always been talking about Palestine. From as long as I can remember, we've been talking about Palestine. But certainly the 7th of October was a watershed, I think, for Israel to give it the ammunition to justify its illegal actions. So, and that's, how I got through today. By the end of our presentation today, when our agent for South Africa, I think it was the ambassador to the Netherlands, summed up what the provisional relief is that South Africa is seeking in terms of relief prayers 1 to 8, that I said, yes, this is what we want. We need it urgently. We can't wait for these 17 judges to take their time because, again, of the vulnerability of the people of Gaza. And I'm not sure what's going to happen when I leave this platform and open my news. You're on mute, Ms. Suleiman.
Sorry, Jeff. When we started now, you said you're watching a dual screen. And just as Rehana says, she's apprehensive about what she's going to see when she moves out onto the next, back into the real sphere, away from the TV and away from this interview. I also heard that the news coming out from Israeli channels, and they're calling it the Antisemitic tribunal. So what do you think about that? And what is your response?
Well, Israelis live in a bubble. They have, partly because, look, as a settler colonial entity, we have to kind of start with that. And what's interesting was that the South African agents today at the court actually began, I think the South African ambassador began their presentation with the Nakba in 1948. So it was very important to put Gaza, I think, within a bigger context, because while Gaza itself, what's happening might rise to the level of genocide, certainly what Israel's done to the Palestinian people over the last 76 years, that a number of the agents mentioned, really amounts to the destruction of the Palestinian people and their culture and really their country. So I think that's the bigger framework. Israelis do not see that. They have an ideology, of course, as the Zionist ideology, which is completely designed to justify the settler colonial enterprise. So for them, you see, they can't go back because they can't take responsibility for what happened. So the whole Palestinian issue is reduced to security, right? So they're the terrorists. So there is no human rights issue. There is no international law issue. There's no bigger moral or historical issues. It's all a matter of security. And in that, they're the bad guys, and we're simply a peaceful democracy trying to defend itself. So from within that paradigm, within that framework, that's where Israelis come from. They don't see any context whatsoever, and certainly no Palestinian perspective. And certainly no, what Rehana was saying, no empathy, no sympathy, no compassion for what the Palestinians are going through. And then you in terms of this particular instance, and what they do is they start from day one, which is October 7th. So the whole thing begins with the Hamas attack. There's no context. As a matter of fact, when the UN Secretary General Guterres said this attack happened in a context, the Israelis got furious and demanded his resignation, because again, that makes them responsible, accountable, and they're trying to avoid that at every cost. So what's happening then is, if you begin the story on October 7th, then we were attacked and we're simply responding. You see, and that's going to be the whole thrust of the Israeli case, because there's no intent for genocide from the Israeli point of view. We're simply defending ourselves. But that, of course, ignores what happened before October 7th, the context of October 7th, and obviously, and this is what the case is all about, what happened immediately after the attack and the collective punishment of the entire population of Gaza for acts that Hamas might be held accountable for, responsible for, but nevertheless that the people of Gaza have no responsibility for. So that's sort of where the Israelis just see this as a farce. They see it as anti-Semitic, and that's where they are. And I can understand that, because without that little framework that you're in, if you look around, you really do have to see the destruction that you've caused the Palestinians all these years, and that Israelis do not want to deal with.
So, Rehana, building on what Professor Halper has just said, I mean, I think Professor Professor Lowe, sorry, he highlighted this very aspect of Owen Lowe when he said that firstly, you cannot, claim self-defense, in terms of what has happened. Secondly, no matter what Hamas or any other resistance movement does, there's absolutely no justification for genocide. And for me, that just nailed it. So, because, I mean, that's what they're going to claim. So what is your opinion on that?
No, I totally agree with Jeff, and I totally agree with Advocate Lowe wholeheartedly, in the sense that, yes, the Israeli occupied apartheid Israel is going to forget about what happened for the last 76 years, and their focus is going to be very narrow. And I suspect the arguments is going to be confined largely to look at what was done to us on the 7th of October. And again, Advocate Lowe raised it quite well. He said how, and I quoted him, no matter how monstrous the 7th of October 2023 may have been, genocide is never a permitted defense. The prohibition of genocide is a peremptory rule of law, no matter how great the threat is, and can never be justified. I mean, those words, we just heard it, and and that's why I said he brought calmness when we heard all about when we heard the accounts of the social justice sort of atrocities that were meted out on the people in Gaza. So yes, I don't believe that Israel will be able to sustain its defense of self-defense, given it having exceeded those boundaries multifold. We know in South African law we have self-defense, and once you exceed the boundaries of self-defense, you become the perpetrator. So I'm not sure how the International Court of Justice views self-defense, but be that as it may, genocide can never be equated to whatever alleged atrocities the Israeli regime may feel it had sustained on the 7th of October. So yes, it's going to be interesting tomorrow. I think South Africa tried to preempt the legal arguments, and I think that was great, because they've already put out how they would possibly respond. I'm not sure whether in the International Court of Justice, whether there is an opportunity to reply, as we have in South Africa, where the applicant then has an opportunity to reply. I don't think so. I didn't see that on the proceedings. So I guess South Africa had to preempt and then sort of strategize the legal argument so that whatever is raised tomorrow is already addressed. But what I think was noteworthy for me was just the manner in which South Africa presented its case. I think it was a brilliant strategy in how it had broken it out into little chunks, and each one drove a point home, but still bringing it all together. And at the end of it all, it dealt with each and every aspect that it was required to have dealt with in terms of bringing an application of this nature to the International Court of Justice from, does South Africa have the legal standing? Is there jurisdiction? Is there genocide? And I think bringing in a few of the visuals, they were not overt. They were not overboard. Those videos that we saw, the footage that was brought as the portfolio of evidence, to support the narrative that Israel might be using in saying that this hasn't happened. South Africa managed to squeeze in a fair amount of footage, including the footage, although it was cut off, by the Prime Minister, in terms of how he controls the language and how it then filters through down to the soldiers. What I did read in the application was an example of one soldier boasting about how he had brought 42 knees down. That's in the application. I also remember of a woman being raped. And I also remember, that's not in the application, but I'm just talking about what there were more grotesque videos that could have been used by South Africa, but I think South Africa was conservative in that respect to not overplay that in the media, because it is out there. And I think they've given sufficient. I believe this a prima facie case has been made out for a provisional measures to be implemented or granted by the court. All I am asking for is that the court mustn't take so long to be able to give us a verdict on the interim relief. That is what we call it in South Africa. In the International Court of Justice, it is called provisional measures. So I think we need to be able to bolster that and ensure that in the public domain, that we continue so that it can fall onto the ears of those 17 judges. That time is of essence, because we're sitting with a vulnerable population that you and I and Jeff do not know, and everyone else listening in do not know what's going to happen when we move off the screen.
So very quickly, before I move to Jeff again, I would just like to ask you, with regards to the diversity of the South African team, do you feel that that was impactful? And secondly, for me, for the first time, I felt that, wow, look at this country, the small little South Africa out there. It's like David taking on Goliath, because Israel's arrogance is, carried on the shoulders of the US. So, and here it was showing its capability, its ability, and that we're not about Hasbara, that we're not, here for blood libel. We're not making stories. We're not imagining this, as Jeff has mentioned, imagining the way in which Israelis are treating Palestinians. It's a reality. These are the facts, and I think that's what one of the agents from South Africa even mentioned. We're not going to waste our time with too much images. We're here to present the facts to you, and we let the facts speak to you themselves, to you.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think that diversity from day one, when the legal team was chosen. But I think it's also a policy of government to ensure that it is inclusive in terms of its briefing patterns. So I didn't find it surprising that there was a gender balance, although there was 2 women versus, I think, 4 men, but still the lead person was Adila Hassim SC. And I think I felt, yes, it's somebody that understands the issues. Yes, she will make a good counsel. And that goes for each and every other counsel that presented, and professors, Professor Max du Plessis, Professor Dugard. These are people who are, Professor Dugard, having worked, I think, serves on the board of trustees for the Palestinians. These are people who knows what they're talking about. Advocate Tembeka on land issues, he is so strong. So certainly, yes, they picked the team very well. No surprises that it would be diverse. I would have been surprised if it was not diverse, because I think we all would have made a noise then. And certainly the presentations were so compelling and concise. Compelling, concise, legally sound, preempted what is expected tomorrow. And I was so proud, Jeff, to be a South African. Seriously proud. I sat there and all I did was smile as I heard their arguments until I got to Agent Blinny. So yes, so for me, I think the other takeaway that I had was from Agent Blinny, but at that stage, as I said, I was very emotional. She said, there is no safe space in Gaza and the world should be ashamed. She ended the presentation with that. And I think that was just spot on.
So, Jeff, considering this, what has happened and transpired here today, And if you look at the responses coming out of Israeli media, and I mean, you're familiar with the situation there, I would just like to bring in Martin Luther King's quote, where he said that, over the last few years, he wrote this in 1963. He said that I've been gravely disappointed with a white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. And I think that this is exactly what the West, in many ways, and I'm saying West intentionally, because most of the European states and the Americans have supported this particular ideal, that whenever the Palestinians brought a case forward, it was always, we have to talk, we have to negotiate. And 75 years of talking and negotiating and sitting at the table has actually protracted the slow genocide into what has now become a fast-paced genocide. And it is always about the white liberal telling everybody else that, this is how you must feel, this is how you must encounter and experience your pain and your suffering, and this is how you should not react or you should react. And this comes again directly to the mentality that you speak about inside of Israel. How do you understand this in terms of what you have just seen and everything that you have been fighting for as an activist all your life?
Well, I mean, it's certainly true. Zionism is an extension of European colonialism, and it only succeeded because of the support it got from Great Britain, who had the mandate over Palestine, which was itself colonial. It was a double colonialism of the British and the Zionists. And then, of course, in 1947, in the UN itself. I mean, the UN it bears a lot of responsibility here. And don't forget, in the UN in those days, it was overwhelmingly European countries, the global north countries, as we call them today, that dominated the United Nations system. And the United Nations then partitioned Palestine into a Jewish state. The Jews, by the way, were a third of the population, most of them having gotten to the country only in the last 20 years. And they got 56% of Palestine as a Jewish state, whereas the Palestinian indigenous population that had owned 94% of the country in 1947 and were the 2/3 of the population only received 42%. So, but even the whole idea of partition, what right do the United Nations have to partition Palestine without the authority or without the agreement of the indigenous population? So the United Nations itself, all these years, has really in many ways been an agent of Western imperialism, Western colonialism. And that's certainly, the case until today in Israel. And that's where this is going to be very interesting. You're right. I think everybody is really appreciative of the fact that it was South Africa, with all of your history, that really inspires us here in our own anti-apartheid movement, that brought this case before the ICJ. And it's significant that a good number of the judges, I don't know how many exactly, come from the global South and not from the North. And it's going to be really interesting to see, can this voice of conscience, of international law, of solidarity of the global South with the Palestinian people, will that be able to overcome the power that the global North has, especially the European and American states have, both in the United Nations itself, because at some point, some of this is going to get to the Security Council, and the United States has the veto. So it can veto some of the decisions that will be taken. And at the same time, again, does the ICJ, which in many ways represents international law and the wider international community, will it have the ability, both morally and in terms of its moral authority, and also legally in terms of its legal power, to impose a provisional measure, especially ceasefire, which is the ultimate provisional measure, on Israel in defiance of Israel and all its global north patrons. That's going to, so there's really a power play here. And I think it's something we really have to look at from the point of view, because I think this has implications for oppressed peoples everywhere. Will oppressed peoples find that they have some clout in the international system in terms of what the ICJ decides in terms of Israel over Gaza?
So Rehana, this again now, because we have a very, what shall I say, we're in a defining moment right now. Gaza is a defining moment for morality, for humanity, for the value of law, for the value of international law. And I mean, as South Africans, we're very skeptical about the law because, I mean, apartheid and the law was used to justify immorality and immoral action and unethical behavior, which was the apartheid, and the law justified it, it endorsed it, and it perpetuated it. So when you look at all that has come out from these, come out from Gaza, basically. Gaza is, like I said, is our defining moment. And from our agents who spoke, they said this is a crisis of humanity, a living hell, an unmatched horror. It is not about a conflict between two sides. It is about Israel as an occupying power. And I mean, like 75 years down the line, I mean, does this line, still have to be reiterated? Do people still need to repeat it? How can you not know that Israel is an occupying power? And then, of course, the whole question about, whether the law has the potential to bring about justice. When you look at the ICJ, and we know that South Africa made a formidable case, but ultimately then it looks, the decision is going to come from the judges sitting there, and they're representative of different countries, perhaps carrying their own political identity or their own subjective morality. But the function of this court, in terms of this particular case, is to look at the Genocide Convention, and that is fundamental principles of morality. And the Genocide Convention looks at the denial of the right of existence of entire groups. Are you confident about an outcome from the ICJ? And how do you view the panel? And how do you think, based on on the previous decisions that they've made, do you think that we will see a shift?
Yes, that's a difficult question to answer, but I will definitely attempt to answer it. Yes, look, what alternatives did South Africa have to come to the assistance of the genocide being meted out against Palestinians in Gaza? What were our avenues? Certainly, it did not rush in to launch this application in December. There were a series from, I think, around about the 13th. I've got the date somewhere because it's in the court papers. From the 30th of October right through till the 21st of December, there were a series of warnings that were given to Israel to say what you are doing is you are heading, and at that stage, they weren't talking genocide. It was, you are heading towards a looming genocide. And given what was unfolding in the media, and from personal accounts from people given to, I would think, to the Minister of International Relations and other ministries within our cabinet, South Africa then took the decision that its only resort that it could have in terms of dealing with a nation that's a signatory to the Genocide Convention, and the ICJ being the highest court of authority really within the UN, this is its only avenue. Because talking to the Israeli government totally ignored South Africa on the 21st of December when South Africa sent a note verbal to the Embassy of Israel. And Israel came back and said, South Africa, they don't know what they're talking about. These things do not exist in South Africa, do not exist in Gaza. So yes, South Africa then was, I would say, bound in terms of it being a signatory to this convention to ensure that it does something to stop the genocide from continuing. Now we are saddled with, and we are faced with, yes, so are we confident that these 17 judges are going to give us what we want? I started off by saying I believe a prima facie case has been met. We've met, these are jurists. We are dealing with legally trained people. I am mindful that they might have vested interest, but the outcome here is really going to tell us whether the ICJ then is just a dummy and a puppet of the West, and that it cannot be trusted, and do not bother to bring any other cases. We do know of other cases that have come. None of those crimes were as stark as what we've seen unfolded in such a short space of time from the 7th of October. I'm thinking of Rohingya, particularly here. Yes, there were atrocities meted out there, but I'm looking at the mass and scale. Yes, South Africa does have warm relations with Palestine. It's always enjoyed that warm relations, simply because we have that shared history of Israel, apartheid Israel, being a supporter of apartheid South Africa. So I think it was, we owed this to them. We could see what was happening because we could identify with the land deprivations, the torture, the indiscriminate arrests, and so forth. Of course, in Gaza, it's far worse because you're talking about massive bombardment upon bombardment, the denial of humanitarian aid, the prevention of or the bombing of hospitals, the maiming of people, and countless people still sitting under the rubble. Coming back to the direct question that you've asked, Dr. Suleiman, do I have confidence? I have to remain hopeful. And I'm hoping that these judges are going to be listening to what's out in the media. This is the evidence that is before them. They've got to deal, as a legally trained mind, they've got to apply the law. If they're not going to apply the law, fine, then they're going to be totally disregarded as a platform or as a court that one would seek justice in. So I think that is largely where it is. But I am hopeful and I am convinced that a provisional measure will be granted, especially for the immediate suspension of the military. There were 1 to 8. I think there are 8 measures that have been asked for. I think if we get 1 to 6, that would be absolutely a relief for the people of Gaza, who are now at this point, they are human beings and they are vulnerable. So yes, I have to remain vulnerable. I am skeptical, but I'm putting my skepticism aside in the light of the manner in which the portfolio of evidence was presented today.
Jeff, as somebody who's living in Jerusalem, I mean, there have been, innumerous reports about the crackdown on Jerusalemites, on Israelis. People are speaking out, the new laws that were concocted, that you can't speak against the state, that you can't show support to Palestine, etc. Have you ever felt threatened? Were you threatened? Have you lived under difficult conditions? How do you feel about all of this? And how do you still maintain activism?
Well, I mean, first of all, being Jewish gives me all the privilege in the world. In other words, I can protest. I can even, get in front of bulldozers that are coming to demolish Palestinian homes, being the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. I can post whatever I want on Facebook, as critical of Israel as I want to be, and the war. I can, in other words, I can speak out. And I can do all that Palestinians cannot do, including Palestinian citizens of Israel, because I'm Jewish. And therefore, as an activist, I'm trying to, I use my privilege in order to say things and do things in resistance to occupation, apartheid, colonialism, for Palestinian rights that the Palestinians themselves sometimes aren't able to do, or are arrested or killed. If I get in front of a bulldozer to stop a demolition, an army bulldozer, they'll take me, they'll throw me aside, and they'll put me in the paddy wagon for an hour, and then they'll let me go. If the Palestinian owner of that house did the same thing, they'd shoot him on the spot. No questions asked. So there's a very different kind of a relationship I have that gives me that privilege to protest that the Palestinians don't have, and we do that. But at the same time, again, because because Israelis are so trapped. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. 94%. Think of this: 94% of Israeli Jews support what's happening in Gaza. Now, they don't know what's happening in terms of the Palestinians, because everything that's come up in the ICJ is completely unknown to Israelis. You never see it on Israeli TV. They never show footage of the destruction in Gaza, of the suffering in Gaza. All of that you know, that you're exposed to, that context is completely missing here. And therefore, for Israelis, this is strange. We're doing this war, we're fighting Hamas, and everybody's angry at us. Why? And they don't see that wider context. And it's the same in general. That, like I said, Israel does not see that wider context. And so from that point of view, it's very hard to be an activist here. I don't feel threatened in any way, but at the same time, I don't feel effective either, because I'm so out of the box for Israelis. You know, the argument in Israel is a Zionist argument, the Zionist left versus the Zionist right. Should we give up settlements or shouldn't we give up settlements? But the whole idea of a Jewish state on 78% of Palestine, and the continued exile of the refugees, and the continued occupation and apartheid of the Palestinians in the occupied territory, all that is a given. The right and the left in the Zionist framework in Israel, almost all Israelis accept that grounding. Then the argument is, tinkering here or there with that. When someone like me comes in, or some of my other anti-Zionist critical partners come in, or Palestinians, or the ICJ, and says, "Whoa, wait a minute! This whole thing is colonialism, and it's unjust, and it's war crimes, and it's genocide." It just is so absolutely unfathomable and unthinkable to Israelis. It's like science fiction for them, and that's why Israelis aren't really any kind of a partner in any peace process or any kind of international movement to try to better things with Palestinians. Because even the liberal ones are caught. And what's interesting is, when I said 94%, is that Israel's an open society. We have libraries. We have every internet channel you can imagine. Half the Israelis travel abroad every year. It's an educated population, very involved economically in the world, and so on. So when you get a situation where in an open democracy, which Israel is if you're Jewish, 94% of the people agree on a genocidal condition, whoa, something is really, groupthink is really happening to a way that really kind of should give us all pause in terms of the power of the media, the power of narratives, and the power of self-interest.
Jeff, I have to stop you here because the press briefing is live and we want to cross over. Rehana, I want to say thank you very much for making the time, for being here with us. And if there's anything you want to add quickly before we cross over.
I just wanted to say the narrative, I think, and that is why it was important for us to bring this case, so that the world can hear what this case is about. So that if that media within Israel has been clamped down, that you only get certain information, you hear in the public opinion, this is what the narrative is. And I think if we succeed on that basis, then I say, well done. Thank you, Jeff. Lovely speaking to you. Thank you, Dr. Suleiman, for having me, and Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. And I also just want to quickly raise this with Jeff and say that, Jeff, if you think about it, you said the Israelis don't know, but is that an excuse? In this day and age, with social media and with so much alternate news, I mean, there's absolutely no excuse for the ignorance of the Israelis. But we have to take that question up after the press briefing, if you don't mind.
Israel military operation in and around Gaza. The commitment to justice and bring an end to material atrocities in Palestine resonate deeply with the collective consciousness of the global community. The scale of these actions is reminiscent of the Rwandan genocide 30 years ago. We are here on behalf of South Africa and the global community to seek justice for the victims, particularly children, women, and the elderly. We believe that without the intervention of this court and the international community, we will see the total destruction of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Remaining silent in the face of this, in and of itself, would be a gross violation of international law. We are seeking the court to intervene and to stop the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Today, it is common cause that the Rwanda genocide could have been prevented. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan expressed it regretted this when he said, and I quote, "The international community failed Rwanda, and that must leave us always with a sense of bitter regret and abiding sorrow." Close quote. Rwanda stands out as a stem and a severe victim to all of us for having failed to address these interrelated matters. Let us not have to live and have the same regret when it comes to Palestine. We must stop the genocide in real time. This case presents the court with an opportunity to act in real time to prevent genocide from continuing in Gaza by issuing an injunction. South Africa is a multifaceted, multicultural, and multiracial country that embraces the concept of people as a way of defining who we are and how we relate to others. Ubuntu means I am because you are. I am because Hamza Al Dadou is. You are because Dania Abu Mohsen is. The philosophy of Ubuntu means humanity and is reflected in the idea that we affirm our humanity when we affirm the humanity of others. It has played a major role in the forging of South African national consciousness and in the process of its democratic transformation and nation building. Our history is one of repression and violence, human rights abuses, apartheid as a crime against humanity, discrimination and distrust between people born on the same soil. This history enjoys us to stand in principle in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Because our history is one marked by crimes against humanity, the recent horrific scenes of the city of Gaza being transformed into a mass burial ground haunt our minds. The alarming sight of people and armed forces rejoicing the chants who are finishing off Gaza is an act among several others that warrant a thorough examination by the court, the honorable court that will in. The actions taken by Israel against the Palestinians are considered by many state parties, including the state of Palestine itself, to be in breach of the Genocide Convention. Palestine has expressed great concern over the international system incapability to prevent acts of genocide against its people and has urgently called for actions to hold sidelines. The uncompromising enforcement of the rule of law must be used to seize the ongoing atrocities in Gaza Strip. This case is about asserting the international rule of law. Our distinguished team of lawyers has expanded our case before the Honorable Court. The timeless words spoken by Martin Luther King, they ring dear, and that is what he called for the court to do when he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Hold true now more than ever before. The esteemed institution has the opportunity not only to reaffirm but also to strengthen humanity's commitment to justice. This can be achieved by infusing the Genocide Convention with vibrancy and bringing it to life. We trust that after hearing us presenting the facts, the legal arguments, truth, the court will grant the protections in real time and on an urgent basis. The injunction is relevant. I want to conclude again by quoting Martin Luther when he said, "The arch of the moral of the universe is law, always bending towards justice. There shall be justice for the people of Palestine." Thank you.
Free Palestine! W South Africa!
Bravo. Je crois exprimer l'opinion générale de ceux qui, à remercier ce matin et de des très nombreux militants qui sont là et les millions de personnes qui verront nos vidéos en disant de tout cœur 1 million de fois merci à l'Afrique, à son gouvernement qui a ramené dans une situation honteuse l'humanité sur le devant de la scène. Ici, nous sommes dans une cour de justice, d'un ordre international imparfait, c'est certain, d'un droit international incomplet, c'est certain, mais du droit, de la loi, et non pas de la loi du plus fort.
Merci, Monsieur Mélenchon.
I think I speak for everyone here as well as the millions of people around the world saying thank you to South Africa for bringing this case to the court of international justice. This is a court which is for international law, and as perfect as it is, it upholds and protects international rights.
Ce matin a été plaidé très brillamment le fait que la Cour peut décider des mesures conservatoires immédiates. Je me rends compte de la responsabilité morale qu'ont à ce moment les juges qui ont à prendre cette décision. Mais d'eux dépend le fait que l'humanité tout entière, le peuple humain tout entier, reprenne confiance dans le fait qu'il existe mieux que la loi du plus fort, c'est la loi du plus humain.
Brilliantly put by the team of South Africa and the International Justice, pleading for humanity, for the universal rights of everyone, for all of humanity, and it is a case for to overcome the law of the strongest, the law of the mightiest, of the clash of civilizations. This is for upholding international law and humanity for all. Universal human rights.
Bravo.
I've been asked to speak up, so I will. First of all, thank you everyone for coming today at this massive media briefing at the end of the presentation by South Africa this morning. I just want to put on record my great thanks to the Republic of South Africa for having the courage to take the case on in the first place, to bring it here to the International Court of Justice, and thank all those other governments around the world that have joined in the case, pointing out that the bombardment of children, of civilians, of schools, of hospitals, of homes, of agricultural places, and the driving of the population of Gaza into places they were told were safe and turned out to be incredibly dangerous. The bravery of them in bringing the case and the world hearing it today is something that I think we should all thank South Africa for. Secondly, in presenting the case, they did it in non-sensational terms. They went in detail through the history of the Genocide Convention and how it came about after the horrors of the Second World War and other genocides that have taken place, and pointed out that what is happening in Gaza is an attack against the population of Gaza as a whole. That is where the Genocide Convention comes in. But these things don't come from nowhere. Israel's weapons are being supplied by the United States with the support of many European countries, including my own. And the demonstrations in support of the people of Palestine all around the world are getting bigger and bigger. The world has woken up to the plight of the Palestinian people. And it's taken the loss of 30,000 lives. The world to wake up at last. I hope that the interim orders that have been requested by the South African delegation this morning will be granted, and there will be a demand that the bombardment of Gaza cease. But in the meantime, those powerful governments that supply Israel with its weapons can also make that demand for a ceasefire and assist that by stopping the supply of those weapons that have been used to kill so many people in Gaza. I want to conclude by saying this. Thank people all over the world for speaking up for the Palestinian people, speaking up for their rights, for their justice, for their culture, and our horror at everything that's happened, including the almost year zero strategy of the Israeli Defense Force in bombing all the archaeological remains that are there in Gaza. But also to say thank you to those people in Israel that have spoken out against the war in Gaza, those people in Israel that have spoken out against the occupation of Palestine, because they too want to live in a world of peace and freedom. Today has been a great day in the sense that the world has heard in detailed terms the illegality of what's going on. I'll be on the streets of London on Saturday. I hope there'll be demonstrations all around the world on Saturday saying, bring peace, bring justice, bring hope to the people of Palestine. Thank you.
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free, 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 free Palestine!
W South Africa!
I'm Peter, I'm a member of the Belgian Parliament, and today I'm from the Workers' Party of Belgium, and today in the Belgian Parliament there will be a debate whether Belgium will follow the example of South Africa. And I think there's two main reasons for that. We have to thank the South African government for its action and for its call for humanity, because this case is not only a case for Palestinians, it is a case for the humanity all over the world. And secondly, I have to thank also all activists, all democracy lovers, all people on the streets that are sounding the voice of Palestinian people, because if we put pressure on the government, and we have to put pressure on the European governments to take some actions, not only in this court, but also on the economical level, an economic embargo, a military embargo. We have to put pressure also from Europe. So thank you very much to the South African delegation. Thank you very much, all activists for Palestine, all activists for humanity. Thank you.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Gaza! Free Palestine! Free from the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea!
From the river to the sea!
Thank you, South Africa!
God bless South Africa.
God bless South Africa!
Hi, Jeff. I think we're back live again. Did you manage to watch the press briefing? I need you to unmute, Jeff.
No, I watched the press conference. It was very, very emotional.
Okay, good.
I think people are feeling really a sense of history, even. I mean, this is the first time, there's been UN resolutions about, supporting the Palestinians and against what Israel's doing, and discussions at the Security Council and so on. This is the first real major international forum that really has some power, in which this issue has really been just brought out and laid out really in detail, and where Israel has had to defend itself. That's how serious Israel takes this. They couldn't, their first impulse was just to ignore it and not participate, but they understood that they had to do that. So I think this really is a historic day, and I think the press conference reflected that to some degree, the emotion of it as well as the political importance of it.
So you touch on something very important, and that is that, you know, the voices came out, and the voices, I think it's world over, people were forced to make a decision. And of course, ultimately, we're going to see exactly as with South Africa, on which side of history were you standing on. Now, coming back to what you said earlier, and it's what I want to come back to, again, it comes to the voice and to the narrative, because there's a Zionist, a local Zionist in South Africa who wrote in a paper recently, just yesterday or the day before, and he said that there are unintended consequences of the ICJ is that Israel will get a voice. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, is this a joke of a headline? Like, you know, this is absolute arrogance coming from simply listening to your own voice for so many years. Israel has always had the voice. It's the Palestinian voice that has been silenced, you know. And now Jeremy Corbyn speaks about South Africa presented its case in non-sensational terms. But Israel is going to use exactly the opposite. It plans to use sensationalism. So combining this, the content, the narrative, the voice, using sensation, thinking that it's all a Hollywood movie, that we have control over it, we can do what we want. And I don't know, I just saw a tweet now, and you can verify for me and tell me if it's correct or not. The Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, after seeing the South African team, he said that it is affiliated with Hamas. I'm not sure if this is real or if this is a joke, but I'd like you to comment on that.
Well, Israel Katz, who's our foreign minister, is not the brightest light bulb in the candelabra. So, you know, he could have said that. They have no idea. I'm telling you what I said before, that Israel is, you know, Israelis are almost like tourists in their own country. They have no idea what they've done, of the history, and they have no knowledge of the Arab world. I mean, this is like we're sitting in Holland, where, you know, that Israel is next door to Holland, because, you know, they're all saying that, you know, Hamas is Shiite, or that, you know, Hamas is a member, or that Iran is supporting Hamas because they're supporting the Shiites in Gaza. And all this is absolutely ridiculous. There aren't Shiites in Gaza. Hamas is a Sunni organization. Even the internal dynamics that are very important to understand what's going on politically are completely, Israel simply, you know, we don't use the word Palestinians in Israel. We talk about Arabs in a very generic sense, because if we talk about Palestinians, then we have to give legitimacy and recognition to their existence as a national group, that we don't do, because otherwise the exclusive Jewish claim to the land of Israel is undermined. And it's the same in terms of the rest of the Arab world. They're all Arabs. Even the Turks, even the Iran, they're all Arabs, or whatever they are. You see, that's kind of that's to sort of dismiss them, sort of it's not an analysis, just a way of dismissing the entire Arab world around. And there it gets back to your point that Israel certainly identifies itself with the West. It sees itself as Europe, and it's encouraged to do so. You know, we're in the Eurovision film song contest. We're in the European Football League. We're in, you know, the European Basketball League. You know, we are a part of Europe in that sense. And of course, the United States, which is the great patron of Israel. So in many ways, you know, Israel is here in the Middle East, but its back is to the Middle East. In fact, if you look at the wall, the apartheid wall, we call it, you know, that Israel has built all down the West Bank, you could really say that that is the back of Israel. Its back is to the Middle East. We don't want to know about it. We don't care about it. All these distinctions between Hamas and Shiites, that doesn't matter to us at all. And we're focused on Europe and on the United States. And in fact, you know, that's where its support comes from. It's military aid, it's political support, and so on. And I think that's, you know, from that point of view, you're right. You know, you still have this neo-colonial reality in the world. Although I have to say one more thing, and that is, but Israel's very smart as well. It has normalized with the Arab governments, and here we really have to make a distinction between governments and the people. You know, Israel. I wrote a book called War Against the People. Israel has very close relations with China, with Russia, with all these, and actually most of the countries of the world, because mainly because of its military prowess, that it's developed on the Palestinians. So part of the problem is that the peoples of the world, I think, overwhelmingly support the Palestinian cause. And you saw the outpourings, in reaction to what Israel's doing in Gaza. But the governments of the world have their own interests. They work in a very transactional, cynical sort of a way. And that's why, again, we have to see, this is a test. Does the ICJ in the end represent the states of the world? And the judges come from different states, right? They don't represent the peoples. And therefore, will they reflect the interests of the states? And the states are still dominated by Europe and the United States? Or will the court side with the peoples of the world that really do want justice and do want international law applied and do want Israel held accountable for genocide and the ceasefire obviously imposed on Gaza? So this is going to be a test. The ICJ is sort of in the middle between these transactional governments for which justice has no meaning and that support Israel, and the peoples of the world for which justice does have meaning and who overwhelmingly, I think, support the Palestinian cause.
But I think, this is my personal theory now. For Israel, like I said, Israel has been so used, Israel and America for that matter, maybe shall I call it the Three Musketeers, Israel, America, and the UK, are so used to hearing their own voices that they're not paying attention to what's happening in the world. And I believe that there is there's a whole game of chess being played at the moment, and they're missing the way in which the pieces are moving. And I do believe that after this ICJ hearing, we're going to see something substantive with regards to that. But I don't want to raise too much about that right now. What I do want to ask you, though, is that you've been active on this house demolitions. How will what is happening in the ICJ right now impact on house demolitions in the West Bank and Jerusalem?
Well, I mean, the ICJ is obviously focused on what's happening in Gaza. You could make the argument, I might have accepted, it wouldn't have been a good legal strategy, is not only to focus on Gaza, but to look at what's happening in the West Bank. In fact, Gaza is the most dramatic story, with the death and destruction and so on. But the West Bank is actually the more significant story, and East Jerusalem and the West Bank, because that's where Israel wants to expand to. It wants to expand eastward. It really wants to get rid of Gaza. Gaza has no real meaning for Israel. There's too many Arabs there, to use the Israeli language. But the West Bank, is an integral part of greater Israel, where Israel wants to expand in its colonial venture. And so, in a sense, the genocide overall, as we said before, that began with the Nakba, has to do with what Israel continues to oppress the Palestinian citizens of Israel. We forget them. They're sort of the forgotten Palestinians, but their homes are demolished. Almost all their lands have been taken. I mean, they're living this much better than the Palestinians in the occupied territory. And then you have the West Bank that's almost been ethnically cleansed. The Palestinians are now confined to these little islands, 190 some islands in what we call areas A and B of the West Bank. And in the 62% of the West Bank that's controlled by Israel, we call it Area C, that's where demolitions have happened. Israel has demolished about 60,000 Palestinian homes in the West Bank since 1967. Now there's reports of actually up to 100,000 homes, if not more, in Gaza. So house demolitions goes on all the time, whether it's massively, like in Gaza, under military attacks, or much more quietly, incrementally under the radar through legal means, like in the West Bank, where you don't hear about it so much. But the point of it is that, the point of it is to displace the Palestinians and to really ethnically cleanse the country of Palestinians. And when you take when you deny someone a home and you deny someone their land, that is the definition of genocide, because you're denying them the very conditions under which they need for survival. You can't survive without a home. You can't live outside. You can't have a family outside. You can't survive without land because you have no food to grow. You have nowhere to expand your housing for the next generation. And so all of those measures really feed into genocide. I think they're too broad, I guess, to actually bring into a case. I don't know if you could bring a case of genocide of Israel against the Palestinians since 1948. That would be a case that would open the whole can of worms. But at least what's been done that's very important is this case with Gaza. And I think in Gaza, certainly, the house demolition issues become very important.
So there has been research being done, and I do believe that there's some prominent voices who are speaking out about the slow genocide of the Palestinians, which encompasses all of this, West Bank, Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, etc. What I want to ask from you, considering the house demolitions, settlers have been invited to come from all over Europe to populate these illegal settlements where Palestinians are displaced or their homes have been demolished. This is a very important point for me. In that case, where you're coming in intentionally knowing that there's a criminal act that has been committed because it is illegal by international law. Not only that, homes have been stolen. There's the famous settler that went viral where he said, if I don't steal it, somebody else will steal it, to a Palestinian home, etc. So this is criminal actions, right? And these are individuals, so-called civilians, ordinary people coming from all over Europe to take these homes and settle in illegal settlements. Can it not be legally argued, and I know you're not a legal expert, but in your mind, can it not be legally argued that their status is different to that of a civilian, that they are in fact criminal?
No, of course. I mean, settlers, especially settlers that do illegal things like, destroy other people's homes, build their own homes on land that belongs to other people, and so on. I mean, that's all. There's such a list of criminal things. I mean, what Israel is doing in Palestine overall violates every single article of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is the convention that protects civilians living under occupation and prohibits Israel from doing what it's doing. The Fourth Geneva Convention, very clearly, it's black on white. Prohibits settlements. It prohibits building roads, the whole infrastructure of roads that connect the settlements into Israel, harming the Palestinian economy, killing Palestinians. I mean, everything that Israel's doing, everything the occupation is prohibited in international law, changing the status quo and so on in the Geneva Conventions. The problem is, and you touched at this at the very beginning, the problem is enforcement. I mean, the laws are there. They're beautiful laws, and there's instruments for everything. And it's been well thought out. And you even have institutions like the ICJ and the ICC and so on, and treaties and customary law. You've got a whole architecture of law. The problem is enforcement, because the international legal system is still controlled by states. Here, in this case, just now, it's South Africa as a state that had to have a dispute. And this was part of the discussion of South Africa, why there's a dispute with the state of Israel. In other words, they couldn't come in the name of the Palestinian people. They couldn't come in the name of genocide or the Genocide Convention. It had to be a state, and the state had to make a case before the court on what stake it had in this that gave it the right to come before the court on this case of genocide. And then Israel as a state is responding. Enforcement is all based on states, really. The only international enforcement, let's say sending a protection force into Palestine to protect Palestinians from the military, well, that has to be done through the Security Council. And in the Security Council, you have the veto power of the United States. So in other words, everywhere you turn, certainly as an oppressed person in the world, and you have international law at your disposal, the instruments are there, you can get the best ruling you want, but the issue of enforcement becomes impossible. because again, enforcement is really up to states. There aren't strong international mechanisms for enforcing it. So the question is, if in fact the ICJ adopts the ultimate provisional measure of ordering a ceasefire next week, in Gaza of the Israeli military, will the Israeli state respond? What sanctions are there if Israel says no? And if Israel's backed by Europe and by the United States? And would the United States and Europe want to isolate themselves in terms of a legal ruling of the ICJ that does have some meaning? So these are all, in the end, the whole international legal system does not give much justice and support to oppressed peoples.
And so, as we come to a wrap, I just have two questions for you. The first one is your opinion. Do you believe in a two-state solution, or do you think the way forward for Israel is a one-state solution?
One state. The two-state solution, we never accepted that. But we have to remember that in 1988, the PLO did accept the two-state solution, and that's their prerogative, and we have to follow the Palestinian voice. But it's become clear. I mean, the PLO was dismantled by the Palestinian Authority, under the influence of Israel. And over the years, it's become, clear, the last 20 years, that there is no two-state solution. Israel is not going to give up its occupation. It even denies that it has an occupation. So the only way out, I'm part of a Palestinian-led organization called the One Democratic State Campaign. And you can look at our website, onestatecampaign.org. And we're saying, like South Africa, transformed itself from an apartheid state into a democratic state. With all the problematics, I'm not making it idealized. That process has to happen here as well. We have to transform Israel and its occupation into one democratic state of equal rights for everyone, and obviously including the return of the Palestinian refugees. That has to be done. There can no longer be a Jewish state. It does not mean, this slogan, the river to the sea, does not mean the elimination of Israel. It isn't against the Jews, just like the anti-apartheid movement was not against the whites in South Africa. Rather, it's saying, no, we have to have a new regime, a new country that belongs to all its citizens, and there can't be a Jewish state. Jews can remain. Israeli Jews can remain in the country. Obviously, no one wants to throw them out. They have the right to be here, but as equal citizens with Palestinians. So from the river to the sea means turning this entire country of Palestine, Israel, into a shared state of equal rights for all its citizens and the return of the refugees.
Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us, Jeff, and for making your time to be here with us. And before we conclude, I would like to add some, powerful thoughts which have come to my mind. And that is, I do believe that South Africa has managed to checkmate the narrative. The narrative has always been that the global South peoples, Black people, brown people, Muslims, refugees, migrants, anybody who's not a white is the savage, is the barbarian. But if you look at the entire way in which this entire concept has unfolded of South Africa going to the ICJ, and the way in which the countries of the world have aligned themselves and who they've aligned themselves with, there's one thing that is significantly obvious here, and that is that the global South has followed all the rules. They have taken every measured step to try and bring about peace, to resolve the conflict, to get Israel to stop the ceasefire. On the other hand, the so-called people and states who called us the savages are the ones, in fact, who have broken every rule of law, who have not followed the rule, who have willy-nilly acted in the international system of states, who have gone about debunking the myth of Western supremacy in terms of human rights, of decency, human Western morality, etc. So there certainly has been a shift in the narrative, and that shift in the narrative has been who are actually the savages. And there's a beautiful tweet that was put out, and I think I have to read it. This individual says, "I don't think you all grasp what's happening in South Africa. Black people that survived apartheid went on to become judges and lawyers, and are now defending Palestinians against the country that sent South Africa weapons during apartheid. We are living history. And let's see how that unfolds. So thank you very much, Jeff. And thank you, Salam Media, for this opportunity. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum.